would I answer that question? Practicing really does help, and even mock interviews, if you are presenting, they do with Career Service Center. But even friends and family, go over these things with them, and it'll probably drive them crazy. But it really does help in the end of your process.
In connection, this will tie into the other slides, but as far as looking for assistantships and whatever else, you may not go for interviews, you may not go for open houses, but many New England schools are close enough where you can go and travel and look at them. And that is another way to try to address it and look at the little nuanced things that are available. Like even here at URI, I don't think that I would have known that URI had so much to offer had I just looked at it on a computer screen. Let's be real. It's a lot to navigate on that website versus just going to the union or going to like one of the department here, central hubs here. So that's something to consider as well.
So lastly, funding. Just maybe something so personal. Maybe that should be the beginning. But there are many ways you can get assistance with financial aid in grad school. Again, very dependent on the programs you're looking at. But in general, there are teaching assistantships out there, research assistantships out there, housing assistantships out there. So this is kind of a lingo that you'll hear when we say GA, grad assistant. That's something I was very unfamiliar with until I started applying, but there's fellowships and assistantships. The fellowships, that's usually like a grant, like you're given money. Sometimes they're like scholarship-y, so some schools offer them, some don't. Sometimes that's immediate based on FAFSA you'll fill out. You'll be eligible for a fellowship or not. Sometimes you can apply for them separately, so that's usually something that you qualify for or you write a paper for, and they give it to you, and then that's that. You don't have to do anything else for it. Anything that says an assistantship, obviously teaching research or kind of specific teaching will be helping to teach, and research are usually working one-on-one with a faculty member to help them in whatever research they're conducting. Both of those usually pay, some are stipends, some are hourly, and then aside from those, there's all of these kind of other ones that can fall under other categories. So again, just got to do your research and see what that school has. Here you don't necessarily have to be in a specific major to have a housing assistantship, which is something kind of unique. So keep your mind open to those different options and over-apply, because you never know where there's a hole, or maybe, especially at larger schools, there may be several assistantships. There may not be a lot of competition with the assistant you're applying for. So even if it's a stretch in terms of the qualifications or people they're looking for, give it a shot. Most of them are free to apply for your assistantship. So give them a shot, because you never know, you might get a call back.
Do you apply for those while you when do you apply for those?
Sometimes at the same time, sometimes after. So for some schools, it'll be clear on their application page whether or not you can apply simultaneously. I'd say most of the time, it happens after you've been academically admitted. Sometimes schools have two admissions, academic and then assistantship if they're tethered. So that's something that's college student personnel related. But at other schools, there will be one layer of admission, and then they'll say, now that you're admitted, here are your funding options. You can try these and do these. So depends. Crapshoot. So you just gotta kind of look.
A lot of this too is cost-benefit rationale. When you start looking at certain assistantships, it's a joke what they're actually offering and the amount of work that you're doing. So make sure that you are actually looking at the nuances of it, even with fellowships as well as scholarships. Some of them are time-bound, so they may only be good for 1 year, and you're like, oh, but hey, my program's actually 2 or 3. So you want to make sure that you're not wasting your time by applying to these things that may not help you out all the way.
That's true. Some will cover tuition, some don't. Some will give you money toward food, and some don't. But in some cases, like what it looks like may not necessarily be what it seems. So you really got to dig deep and say, some schools pay up front really, really well, but then don't cover these other things. But that money that they gave you up front was more than enough to cover those things, if that makes sense. So unfortunately, there's no standardization in terms of these assistantships. Schools can kind of make them up at however they like. So really check them out, because they're all different. Some are really worthwhile, and some, again, will be a waste of your time.
Something that I forgot to mention, I recently figured this out with my grandbaby. She's now going to BC, but when she was doing applications into assistantships, she's actually working for Bates. So it's important to also, some schools do like a network of assistantships, so make sure that you are looking at sister schools and whatever else, because in that sense, she was offered an assistantship both at BC and at Bates, and she was like, oh, I'll accept the Bates and go to BC. And I was just like, that's interesting. I didn't know that existed. So make sure that you look into those little nuances too.
break. Just trying.
You're a PT person, right? Is there anybody else physical therapy? I know it's a Drake's thinking about going to. Yes, experience.
Raise it up and quiet.
There's somebody here.
Do you guys not have any questions? Oh,
Well, it's not a question, it's just something to throw out there. Sorry, I went through a graduate school search process too, so I feel like I have a lot to offer, but it's your guys' show. But just to keep in mind, especially if you're doing a national search, different states have majorly different rules about what the assistantships can offer. Like the state of Kansas does not allow any school to give a full tuition waiver. So that's something to keep in mind when you look for assistantships, but they do pay a lot of money in order to cover everything. So it's just something to keep in mind in terms of like how you're planning to finance things. Also know that where you go in terms of cost of living is going to have a huge impact. So like assistantships out here on the East Coast tend towards the higher end, just because living on the East Coast is more expensive. But if you were to look in the Midwest, like our assistantship package up here is about 15,000 to 16,000, whereas most schools in the Midwest are around 10, just because of the cost of living. So that's definitely something to keep in mind.
yeah.
And if making money is important for you during this process, like, I mean, you're going to grad school, so be careful about that dream, but so.
Other things.
Did you visit all the schools you applied to?
I only visited one other, and that's because I was accepted there.
I went to a horrible time to apply to grad school. I was in Orlando at the time, and I was applying to East Coast school, so unfortunately it would have been very expensive if I did. It was my intention to visit the ones that I got accepted to, but then some of their interview days conflicted. Same exact day, no leeway. Schools know about other schools' competitive programs days, and sometimes they schedule them on the same day on purpose to make you have a choice. Yeah, so in that case, I had to make a choice, and I could visit the other one, but I visited 3 out of the 6.
Is there a stigma about online?
No, I know it. I think, again, you just have to make sure that it's accredited, do your research. But yeah, no, I think that they can be really beneficial at times.
For that, just know what you're, because I think for a lot of student affairs folks, there can be some people that are very enlightened and see like an online degree is very valid, but then there's also going to be folks that are denying the process and they're like, you were never actually in the classroom, so what does that mean? And then you're going to find that also there are some mixed programs too, which are really cool, so you can also do like part-time online, part-time in class. So, yeah, so those are pretty cool. And then that way, when they ask like about the program, you can say, oh yeah, we had in-class math. So,
I see, did you have one? What is it?
Yeah, it's just like, sophomore, so you should have an idea of what career you want long-term and not just go to grad school because you want to continue learning in your field.
Tough question. She's wondering, as a sophomore, how much direction you really need, or unless you have a long-term goal of finding a grad school. I think it depends.
I didn't decide to go to grad school until, October of my senior year. So I was going to pursue a whole different career. I went to business as an undergrad, now I'm doing student affairs. They're totally different. But I realized what I was passionate about, and then I made it work. And I got there. So I think it's a case-by-case situation. Depending on the career that you choose, it could be more of like a long-term thing. You need to understand it. Is this right for the career moves I want to make? But then
That's like my story.
What are your, right now, you're a poli-sci, right?
Thinking about graduating.
For your field, I would think about things that you're passionate about within that field. That's what I had to do for myself. I was undergrad. I did 2 different undergrad programs and 2 minors, and I could just sit in the classroom for the rest of my life. I like to learn. So making that decision is very difficult, especially when you're 20-something years old and you're like, what do you want to do for the rest of your life? You're like, I don't know. So just guiding that question, just ask yourself what your passions are. And for me, the biggest driver was I need to survive. Just need to survive. That's number one. But two, that I wanted to continue my education, but at what cost was I going to allow myself to continue my education right off the bat? And for me, I was either going to have it paid for the majority of it, or I wasn't going to go. Like, that was the reality, because for me, it stresses me out to have debt. It's just a personal preference. So it really depends on what you want and your passions, because for economics, there's just so many different routes for you. Just like Paul said, it's a very liberal degree, so it can be all across the market.
How much do GRE scores count like nowadays?
More than SATs.
More than SATs, yeah. Like Lizzie said, they're often used as a tool to kind of weed people out below or above whatever that school's average is, but some schools feel very differently, and so much so that they don't even require it, or it's required and we want to see a certain score in it. So field specific, school specific, but I would say compared to the SAT, it is weighted more because it is a longer test, and knowledge-wise, it does test more challenging.
Endurance.
I guess. Yes.
So that test is endurance.
You have something to prove if you finish it, but it isn't necessarily necessary for some programs or some directions, and it's expensive. So yeah, consider that.
Generally, when you take the GREs more than once, do they put them in juxtaposition with each other, or do they just take a high school?
That is a good question.
When you take it, okay, so you take it once you have that score, you better have studied much better the second time, because your second score replaces your first.
Right.
Okay.
Those are the rules of the game. So
They
do
don't have
not
that.
just take your second exam and be like, I think I studied enough. Take it. It replaces your last exam.
Just to add to that, if you include schools on the GRE list of things to be sent to,
Yeah.
they will still receive your first score. So if you do it and have it listed, like put in that list, you can always go back and access that score to send forward later on. So you want to think about whether or not you're ready for that school to see the score. And so you can put in schools right there, but I would almost recommend just seeing what you got first and then doing it after, just because otherwise you don't know what you're sending.
Yeah.
That is a really good point. Unlike the SAT, the GRE is usually on the computer. That's not something we've said out loud. But
That is, it's
typically it's on the computer.
unless you have accommodations paper, but.
Right, and at the end, you usually get your score right then and there. So he's right, that was something that surprised me, where at the end, it's like, here's what you got. It's like, do you want to send this score to these schools? And it's like, oh, like, I have to decide right now, and my brain is fried. But it is a decision you can make later, but it's not free if you decide to make that decision later. So like when you take the test, you can send it to the free schools for free, otherwise they pay like $25. So know what kind of score you're shooting for going in, but you are going to have to make that decision at the end.